For folks that are coming on, we're pulling up our presentation and then we should be getting started shortly.
We can start the introductions while we wait. You want to do that?
Yeah.
Sure. Awesome. Well, again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this really, really wonderful presentation and discussion we're going to have today. So my name is J.R. Baker Flowers. I am the founder and the director of the Unlearning Project, LLC. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm really excited about this conversation today, more specifically because, again, for some of you who joined us earlier, I created a summer session, which was a digital platform called Community Conversations, a call to action. And my two friends and colleagues here, we all actually attended the same graduate school and graduate program at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I wanted to have a conversation specifically about raising Black, Brown, and Indigenous children, especially during this climate where there's this confluence of COVID-19 and also just this really heightened energy of racism and trying to dismantle racial oppression. And so you all are in for a wonderful treat today. I'm going to pass it along to one of my team members.
Cool, I can go. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you might be. My name is Quentin Sankofa. I use he, him pronouns. I'm coming from Deep East Oakland on Occupy Ohlone land. That is the name of the original people who lived in this area and still do. I'm very excited about being here with you all today. Like Jamaica mentioned, we all met at Clark University where we were studying community development and planning. We got our graduate degree there and then went off to do great things in the world. And from time to time, we come back together for projects like this. So I'm really happy to be back here with you all. And just for folks who might be visually impaired or who might not be seeing us, I just wanted to give a visual description. I'm sitting in my bedroom. There's a white wall behind me. I have a green snake plant that I'll be using for libation. I'm wearing a traditional African print, like a dashiki. It's blue, has brown. I have on over the head headphones with the microphone, and I have on a brown necklace. So for folks who are just listening, hopes that help add a little bit of colorful to your thoughts. And I'll pass it to Amar.
Hi all, my name is Amar Sid. I am coming from Sacramento, California. There's many Indigenous tribes that are here, both recognized and unrecognized. One is the Nissan group, which is pretty interesting, and I have it on another slide, but I just wanted to say their name and their community for right now. I identify as Chicana Indigenous person with roots in Zacatecas, Mexico, and folks from Arizona, northern Mexico, the Yoemi Yaqui tribe. It's also pretty awesome to be here with some fellow friends and former grad students from many years ago, but I just love being with these two people. We have some pretty good camaraderie that really kind of influence my daily life, even though we don't get to be with each other. Kind of bouncing off of Quentin's description, I have a mostly white background behind me with a colorful painting, wearing black with some stripes. I got a sage pin in here for some protection. And my current occupation is a transportation planner for the state, and I also am a community artist and mama, partner, friend, sister. I kind of want to throw back to Jamaica in case you had anything else to share to yours.
Yeah. So I forgot to mention before where I'm coming from. I'm coming from Atlanta, Georgia. And I did not describe myself, but I have on a white shirt. I'm wearing these computer glasses to block the blue ray lights so I can protect my eyes. And the background behind me is a black and white floral print background. Yes, that's what I'd like to share right now. Awesome.
Great.
Okay.
So,
let's move into the grounding and libation so we can kick this off. So we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, this is a quick agenda for us. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to just do a quick grounding that I like to do with my personal space. This is something that is more for personal protection, especially when talking about areas that are maybe provide different meanings for certain people, or maybe are weighted heavier for others. And so I'm going to do a quick grounding and then kick it over to Quentin for the libation. But what I like to do is, if you guys can all just like relax your shoulders, put your feet down on the ground, kind of sit up a little bit, put your hands up. I'm going to close my eyes just for a moment. And what I'm doing right now is just kind of like protecting my own space and my own energy. Then also, like with the grounding, I'm imagining my energy is kind of flowing to the center of the earth and then up to the sun, so that I'm kind of taking in my surrounding. But the grounding portion is that I'm maintaining my own energy. And then I'm also providing space so that we can have a very meaningful conversation and dialogue, and so that we can also be open to what we may be hearing and what we may be sharing. I ask that everybody who's in this space kind of keep that mental note of protecting their own self while also protecting the space as a community. Take a couple of deep breaths. As you're exhaling, kind of like exhale out all of those like heavy weighted energies that you may have, not necessarily all negative, but just maybe some thoughts that aren't necessarily yours, or just they're not sitting well with you for right now. Just kind of exhale those out. And then when you're inhaling in, you're going to inhale in some positive light energy, some vibration, to set the mood for what we're going to discuss. Some of you may notice that your hands may be tingling a little bit. I feel like this is always a great thing for me when that happens, and I usually just kind of flick it out, like flick the energy out that's just not making its way into my space right now. Take a couple more breaths, and then we can come back to center, and then we'll move into the libation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mar. Again, that's very important to do. We acknowledge our ancestry and where we come from, and the lineages that we are striving to maintain. So at this point, I'm going to pour a traditional libation. This is a practice that I learned from the Wose community in Oakland. It is a practice that is held by many, many people around the world. And it's done in many different ways as well. And so I'm going to lead this libation in the way that I've been taught. And just so we're clear, this is a West African tradition. And some of us still hold on to this tradition in the diaspora, some of us consciously and some of us unconsciously. I got introduced to libations unconsciously the first time I was on the block, and I saw brothers crack a 40 and pour out some for somebody who had been murdered or was no longer with us. And I didn't understand that until later on in my life, when I got some more knowledge about our culture and our history, and understood that whether they knew it or not, that was a continuation of a practice our ancestors had given us. And they say we should pour libation anytime we do something that is of importance, and we need our ancestors' energy and guidance to help facilitate whatever we're going to do next. So what I'm going to do, I have a snake plant here, a little small snake plant. And I'm going to just pour a little water, and we're going to invite folks to call out your ancestors. An ancestor can be somebody that was a part of your family, or it could be someone who you knew that had a major impact on you, or even somebody who didn't. Someone's work who may have impacted or influenced you. Um, the other thing I'll say is, so for folks at home, if you want to participate, just drop names in the chat, and I'm going to call them out here. I'm not going to be able to call out all of them, but what'll happen is I'll pour water after each name. And that's inviting those ancestors or their spirit or their energy to be with us. So whoever's energy you want to capture for this moment that you are in now, or invite in, I would ask you to drop their name in the chat. I'll call the names and pour water, and we'll all say Ashe. And so and then we'll close with 3 Ashes. And so I'm going to pour now for the original people of this planet whose names we do not know, but whose shoulders and legacies we all stand on. I'm going to pour, and we can collectively say Ashe. And Ashe is a word that means let it be, let it have force, let it have energy. And one way you can think of it as a right on. So I also want to pour for ancestors in our freedom struggles, such as Grace Lee Boggs, and we say Ashe.
Ashe.
Charity Hicks, who's a Detroit activist, who's no longer with us, was very influential in my life, and we say Ashe.
Ashe.
And I want to invite Jamaica to shout out an ancestor.
June, my great grandfather.
And we say Ashe. And I want to invite Amarta to shout out an ancestor.
I'm going to say my father, Armando Sid.
Armando Sid, we say Ashe. And I see some folks from the chat. Rosalind King, we want to say Ashe.
Ashe.
And we have Catherine Rivas, we say Ashe. And we have Uja Barugun Omo Owo. I might have not pronounced it correct, but we're going to say Ashe. And we're going to ask the ancestors to give us power and energy. We also have Kweku Ward Brew, and we'll say Ashe.
Ashe.
And we'll close saying 3 Ashes. Ashe. Ashe.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Okay. Thank you all. The ancestors are pleased. So we can go now into a presentation from Jamaica. And Jamaica, I'm going to start the timer at 12 minutes, and you'll see it count down.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for that libation and grounding. And thank you, Amar, for grounding us and getting us centered as well. Before we get into that too, really quickly, so we have created a resource that we would love to share with everyone in attendance here. We will be sharing this, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you all, but in the chat where everyone will be able to access the link. It's a Google Doc. And so you all can have access to not only the resource list, but also to this presentation so that you can return to it at your leisure. And the next slide. Awesome. Okay, so once again, for all of you who are just now joining us, I was speaking a little bit earlier about the whole reason why we're here today and why we're having this discussion specifically about raising and protecting Black and Brown and Indigenous children, specifically during moments of crises and also through ongoing racism. The motivation behind that was a summer session that I held through my live stream platform called Community Conversations, a call to action. And I specifically wanted to have a conversation about how Black, Brown, and Indigenous parents are sort of grappling with everything that has happened here in this year of 2020. It's been an explosive year to say the least. And also how they are managing their own stress, how they are managing all of the events that are transpiring around them. And what does that look like in terms of how Black, Brown, and Indigenous children are being raised, right? And so we wanted to further that conversation and present that with you all today, and hopefully really open that up to a much larger conversation and dialogue, right? So there has not really been a better time for our society to really examine, to interrogate, and to also deeply heal these long-standing, extremely embedded colonial belief systems than this year. I know that all of us bared witness to and even may have participated in some of the explosive protests that were happening here across the United States, but also around the entire world. Protests against ongoing white supremacy. And we literally saw the dismantling and taking down of these external representations of white supremacy, colonialism, racism, and patriarchy, right? And so with that, we should now be asking ourselves the question and going inward to ask, how do we then decenter, internalize whiteness and white supremacy from our own consciousness? And this question is really important because we as people who have been victimized by white supremacy, unfortunately, for many of us, there is a process where we have an unconscious assimilation to some of the white ideologies that are so massive and so structured across the world, right? So again, how do we decenter, internalize whiteness and also white supremacy from our consciousness, but also from our daily life practices? And this is especially important because it pertains to how those who are parents can parent their Black, Brown, and Indigenous children a lot more consciously, right? So let's set the framework, right? All of the isms of the world, like sexism, biphobia, classism, misogyny, and also nationalism or nationalist ideology, all of these societal oppressions really leave major imprints onto children. It constructs, it forms, it molds, and literally shapes children's identities. It shapes how they navigate through the world. And it also shapes how they engage with other people that look like them, and also those who are outside of their own racial, ethnic, gender, and every other group in between, outside of those groups, right? So again, we've seen how unconscious assimilation, unfortunately, can show up in so many of the ways that we live, the ways that we think, the ways that we behave, and also how we interact with our environments and also the world around us. So here are just some of the examples, right? When we talk about colonialism and what that looks like, it can manifest in a number of ways. And here are just a few. So when we talk about issues like hierarchy or power structures, what does that look like in regards to how children are being parented or in someone's daily life? Think about, and I'm not sure if many of you who are with us today, and you can leave a response to this, but have any of you heard the phrase, children are to be seen and not heard? Right? That is a very real thing, right? Yep. Okay. So Michelle says, yep. William, yes, yes. Okay. So we're getting a lot of yes responses, right? That is a colonial, yes, everyone is agreeing. That is very much derivative from, oh, Doreen said that's such a Caribbean phrase, right? So that comes from a colonialist ideology. Or how about this one? The hierarchy of gender within the home, right? That's also very, very much derivative from a colonial, a very westernized, patriarchal framework, right? And so when children see that, when they see that being normalized within the home, that leaves an imprint into their psyches. It leaves an imprint into how they see the world. It's very Eurocentric. And so they understand that this to them is normalized and it's quote unquote how the world works, right? So hierarchy is very much a part of that. The issue of control. So we're going to get very deep into this one. So discipline is a form of subjugation, right? And what kind of discipline are we talking about? Well, discipline in the form of spanking and also physical punishment. How many of you all would agree that spanking or beating a child is a form of a colonialist mentality? And I know that some people can feel, kind of particular about this issue because they may say, well, it's a cultural thing and children need to abide by the rules. And I want to make sure that I don't raise a child who is disrespectful. But let's consider this, right? Specifically as it relates to African Americans and Black Americans, Whooping, spanking, or beating a child has been normalized, and it's even sometimes celebrated within the Black community. And we see this, especially now within this hyper-visual, multimedia, social media culture, where some parents even film their children getting a spanking, and then they share that on the on the internet, right? It's something to be celebrated and praised, which is very unfortunate. Well, spanking and beating a child is a relic of the enslavement period, right? Where white slave owners would beat and terrify the enslaved Africans into submission. That's another form of colonialist ideologies. So really quickly, language. What does that look like? So anything that is normalized in regards to anti-humanist, biased, heteronormative statements, and also normalized patriarchal statements, that's a part of, thank you so much, that's a part of colonialist white supremacist thoughts. For example, when someone is making a quote unquote joke or a slur about someone within their own racial, ethnic, or even gender community, I'll give you an example. I frequently will hear some African Americans joke and say, or sometimes even in a very serious tone, they will make statements like, well, see, this is why I don't, this is why I can't deal with quote unquote Black businesses, right? If there's one slight error in their customer service experience, right? And in the same breath, in the same energy, some African Americans, some Black identified people will continue to patronize and be customers of very overt racist, white supremacist businesses like Walmart, Dolce & Gabbana, and Gucci, and still give their money to these organizations who have a chronic history of racial oppression. And so that's very much internalized. But when in regards to parenting, one has to be very conscious and cognizant of the language that they're using, because it can be extremely anti-Black or anti-womanist or any of those things. And children then have this process where they're learning how to relate to people that look like them, right? And also with naming children. I had an experience in my undergraduate education at Clark Atlanta University, which is a historically Black college, or actually is a historically Black university. And in my senior seminar, the professor of the class made a statement that had nothing to do with a senior seminar whatsoever. And he said, you all have to be very careful about what you name your children in the future going forward. You don't want to give them, and I quote, ghetto names or ethnic names or very Black names. This is a Black man, by the way, because you want to make sure that they're able to be employed when they go out looking for jobs in the future. And so after 4 years of being in this institution where I'm proud to really learn more about my Blackness and my Africanness and all of those things, and that to be celebrated, and also because my first name is Jamaica, I raised my hand and I said, you know, I don't understand what you're saying right now. Number one, because this doesn't have anything to do with how we're going to matriculate out into the world in the future. But also, if an institution, a business, or a company is racist, I can have the most Eurocentric sounding name, but when I show up, if they're racist, they're still going to deny me on that principle alone. And so African Americans and other non-white groups can absolutely internalize these Eurocentric ideologies and this cultural value system where one actually believes that more Eurocentric sounding names are actually quote unquote better or have more opportunities to be gainfully employed than more cultural names that are relative to your community group, right? So what are some of the ways that we can go through a process of unlearning and decolonizing some of these long-standing belief systems that are so harmful to our overall spirits and to our bodies and to our minds? What are some of the ways that we can go through this process of unlearning it and stripping away and undoing all of these normalized colonial belief systems? So if we could go to the very next slide. Awesome. So I hope that you all can see that. I know the print may be a little bit small, and these are just a few, right? So one of the first things that you can do is to pause in curiosity, right? When a belief system comes up that is oppressive, it's racist, it's sexist, it's biphobic, and all of those things, stop for a moment and ask yourself, how did I come to a place where I have accepted this, right? Pausing and asking oneself that question, the how, the why, the when, the what, it can really, really unleash and take someone down the path of self-discovery and that process of deeply unlearning those embedded belief systems, right? And I would jump to section number 5 here on this page, but I would say take inventory. Taking inventory and having an opportunity to really catalog where some of these belief systems have emerged from, or some of the institutions from which someone has learned these, is really powerful. Immediate familial ties, but also media, are two of the most powerful and the most profound and impactful systems where we are learning and also relearning and conditioning our minds to adopt some of these really, really heinous belief systems, right? And especially, I would say that this is very important to really be mindful of the type of media that is being consumed, watched, and produced within the household, because children, especially this generation, they have a lot more access to immediate forms of entertaining or engaging media, more so than generations in the past. These children nowadays, they have access to it. It's on a 27 days a week cycle, right? And so that also leaves imprints into their psyche. And if something has a message of being colonialist or being anti them, how they identify who they are as a person, then they will hold on to that, right? So Q, I am going to knock it over to you to get into this conversation about ecology, right? As we reflect on the issue of unlearning colonial belief systems rooted in whiteness, oppression, etc., how are some of the ways that, or should I say, what are some of the ways that colonialist ideologies show up specifically in the space of ecology, environmentalism, and also our own liberation, right? Through our connection to the earth, to ecology, for us as Black, Brown, and Indigenous people.
Cool. Thank you so much. If we could advance to the next slide, that'd be cool. That's a great question. And there's two things that I want to touch on before we get into the formal piece here. One, the piece that you were saying about the person in the classroom, the professor, and I think that illustrates a very good point here, because this is all about your mindset and your philosophy. If you adopt the philosophy of that professor, then you're clearly an integrationist who wants your children or your people to participate in the capitalist empire of America. And that's one train of thought. That has not been the majority of our thought as African people here on indigenous land. We've come from much more of a justice-based framework since we've been here. Justice for us and justice for the indigenous people who have been, who's had their land stolen and their lives stolen as well. And so I think that really gets into the mindset. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today, the way people think. In terms of ecology, there's big problems in the fields of ecology because, you know, we're understanding climate change and eco-catastrophe and things of this nature. But what I would say to your question, Jamaica, just pointedly, is we're dealing with the myth of white supremacy. And I say that very specifically. I don't shorthand it just to white supremacy because there's nothing superior about white people, but they believe they are, but it's not true. It's just it's as true as Santa Claus. It's as true as the Easter Bunny.
Right.
That white people are superior. But the piece that I wanted to just say briefly is that not only have white people created a false belief system that they are superior to other people, this myth of white supremacy also extends to nature. They do believe that they're superior to nature and that they can design nature better than evolution has, or better than God has, or the creator, or whatever your beliefs are. And I'm going to take it one step further and say the myth of white supremacy also touts that white people are superior to life itself. And we're in that phase now. We're in the
Mhm.
biotechnology phase now
Yes.
where it's very evident.
Yes.
Maybe folks wouldn't be able to see it that way 100 years ago. But that's always been the thing with white supremacy. It says that white people are superior to everything and anything.
Everything. Mhm.
And if you're a thinking, real human being, you can understand immediately the problem with that. So to your question, I would just want to highlight those things.
No, that's excellent.
And for the next 10 minutes here, I wanted to go through a couple of thoughts. So I'm part of a collective called the Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project. And a lot of my thinking over the last 10 years has been shaped by being a part of this collective, where we've intentionally put out a line of inquiry or a line of study around what does ecology have to do with social movements that we're a part of. And so I want to start here. We did a project back in the day, not that far, but 2017 called the Black Land and Liberation Initiative. You can visit our website and learn more about that later. But I pulled a couple of graphics from there just to center us today. And so the question for me to you all is, what does Black liberation have to do with ecology? And we advance to the next slide. And in order to answer that question, or to at least begin to have some thoughts about it, I would offer us to break down ecology. And so what does that mean? Well, let's look at the root word of ecology. And at the root of the word ecology is the word eco. It's also a part of a lot of other words that we know. And it's a very fancy, fun word that people toss around a lot these days. But I want to break it down. So the idea around ecology, the root of that eco, it literally means home. It comes from a Greek word, oikos, and more or less that could loosely be translated into home. Some Greek language scholars might differ about, is that the family unit? Is that the relationships between family? Is that the actual home itself? But for our purposes, we can sum it up as home. And so then ecology means the study of home, right? Because logi, or the knowledge of home, like biology is the knowledge or study of life. Ecology is the study or knowledge of home at the end of the day. And not just where home is, but the relationships of home that make up home. And so then let's look at economy, right? So economy simply is the management of home. Okay. So we have all these eco words, but at the end of the day, it's about home, and we have one home, and that's this planet. And so for us as people who have been removed from their home and forced into another's home in a violent way, our relationship to ecology is one that we must delve into and understand better. It's part of our healing process. The graphic you have on the right side there is a spider web graphic that's available at movementgeneration.org. And we do activities that help us understand the web of life and the different ways in which we all are interconnected and interdependent. And that's what ecology teaches us to do. It teaches us to understand the relationships of home, not just the kind of parts and components that make up home, right? So when we look at a place like America, it is not sufficient to just say on paper, oh, X number of Black people live here, X number of white people, or percents of Indigenous people. That's not sufficient. What's sufficient is being able to understand what is the relationship between all of these groups, because that's how we get to a right relationship to each other and a right relationship to managing home. So just want to put that out for folks to think on. Let's move to the next one. Cool. I'm not sure how visible this is to folks, but one of the things that I wanted to highlight for you all is that when we're talking about ecology and economy, it's important to understand that they are one and the same in a way. All economies are based on ecology or their ecosystem. The management of home, or the way that we get our goods and resources and the services we exchange, those are all underpinned by ecological processes, period. The one that is most obvious for folks is the relationship to food. The sun provides the energy for the plants and the microbial organisms to produce things that other species eat, right? This is all underneath the economy. So it's not just about farmers, right? I love farmers, I love farm workers, but it's not just about them, right? It's about the whole system. And so when the system is compromised, we have to examine it at all these different levels. And for the United States, I want to help us understand that slavery and the theft of indigenous land is an ecological catastrophe. That is what happened. And we are dealing with that today. Yes, we want to talk about our ancestors and the brutality that they faced, and the violence, and that's a part of it. But a part of that violence is separating them from land. That is a violent thing to do, with a group of people that have probably been connected with their various pieces of land for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. And that part of the violent process does not get highlighted enough. And not only were they separated from their land, on both sides of the Atlantic, for our ancestors, they were forced into a very violent relationship to land. So we went from being stewards of land, right? People who loved the land, who cared for it, who knew and understood what it meant to our daily survival, basing whole cultures around it, to people who are then forced to do work in a violent way. And the work that we did on this land was not in a regenerative way. The colonial project that followed enslavement forced us to do things that were detrimental to the environment. The entire South of the United States has been changed, terraformed, changed, from the time that we got here, through clear cutting of forests to build homes for a settler colonist, monocropping because of the capitalist industrial model. And with monocropping comes a whole host of problems. The whole pesticide industry that we have today is a result of practices during enslavement of having African people repeatedly plant cotton or repeatedly plant a crop over and over and over and over, which definitely depletes soil. And so when we get into ecology, it's right there with us. It's always been with us since they took us from our homes and brought us to this new place. It's been there. And so this graphic comes from Yes Magazine, and it kind of outlines some of the case for reparations and why it matters. And some estimates put the number upwards of $1 trillion. And so you can check out this graphic for a little bit more information how they trace the legacy. And when we talk reparations and indigenous sovereignty, we're not just talking about stuff that happened during enslavement. We're talking about from then to now, everything that we're still facing. You can look at all the numbers now, and we're still at the bottom of all the socioeconomic indicators. And all of that is a part of our reparations practice. So don't let people tell you this is something about something that happened a long time ago. No, this is about not just enslavement, but the Jim Crow era and the continued assault on our communities today. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll be wrapping up soon and passing it to you, Amar. Okay, so what does Black liberation have to do with ecology? And I'm not speaking on indigenous sovereignty because I'm not an indigenous person. From the friends and comrades that I have, they can answer this question differently. But for us, I think it has everything to do with our liberation. We can fight at the ballot box, and we can organize in our communities. However, it's not enough. We must reconnect our bodies and our spirits to the world around us. And this is for everybody, honestly. Like, most people in the world, especially in America, have been disconnected from land and ecology, period, because of the capitalist project. It's a part of the project to hide it, right? To hide where the oil is taken from, to hide the destruction, to hide the pollution, to hide the refinery. It's all a part of the system. But it's real, and we in California, we know it firsthand now. If you didn't before, we just went through the worst fire season on record, and that's a part of climate change and ecological catastrophes. So for us, Black liberation and ecology, they go together. There's a saying: what you do to the land, you do to the people. What you do to the people, you do to the land. That is true in our scenario, and we know that in our bodies as Black people. And so in order for us to go forward, You can go to the next slide. In order for us to go forward, I say we need to remember our way forward. This is not new to our people. It is still in our culture to love the land, to love relationships, to love working together for common purposes. These are things that are deeply rooted in African people's experience, but in the experience of humanity overall. So as we are in a hostile political climate, where these people seem so powerful and so hard to get, I want us to ground in reality that their time has come, and it has been come, and we will continue to fight. We are not going anywhere. But part of our fight has to involve falling in love with the ecosystems and ecology around us, because no man on this earth is going to liberate us. We will liberate ourselves with the help of our natural ecosystems, and we will be able to then care for those systems that ultimately care for us. And then we can be in right relationship with the world and each other. So I want to ask you a question, Amar, based on this. I don't have time to ask you and Jamaica, but Amar, I wanted to ask you, what has your relationship to nature been and ecology as a Chicana, as an Indigenous person? What has this meant for you along your journey, and what does it look like today for you?
Thank you, Q. I really appreciate your presentation and yours as well, Jamaica, because I think these are part of the greater conversations that we continue to have within our space. In terms of what it means to me as an Indigenous person, I was raised with the land. I was raised that the land is providing for us and heals us as long as we're able to acknowledge and take care of our land. And so that has been more personal in terms of that happens in my home, not necessarily in like a public setting. And I think that really tells us how we are separated from our Indigenous roots, from our ways of life that really provide that holistic healing for us. We don't have that in the schools. We don't have it in any of our educational practices or really our work. Structured work for that matter. But in the home, I was raised with going to the water and releasing and healing. I was raised with traditional ceremony. I was raised with saging and blessing and giving thanks, burning crops. Sorry, I have my children are running around right now. But being connected to the earth, and I'm providing that with my own children and in my own particular career. If we can go to the next 2 slides, actually, so we can jump into this because we are running a little bit out of time. I started thinking more about how it relates to our built environment and why we're not seeing us able to even like walk into grass and like have a relationship with our yards or the fields, and it has to do with our built environment, right? This is a planning conference. This is the American Planning Institution that is on this urban planning like spectrum. I didn't get an urban planning degree. I was really looking for a community planning degree because I felt that I couldn't really be myself, or I couldn't really understand like this very segmented approach to planning. And so community planning really was that bringing in my whole self to the setting. And so I started thinking about access and transportation, and the segmentation and redlining that we see and how it has destructed most of our community access, most of our relationships to each other. Let's go to one more slide. I'll come back to that if we have some time. And so I'm in the transportation and transit industry right now, and I'm looking at how a lot of this really centers what we want to do and how can we get there, right? So what I have here is healing our land, healing ourselves. So back to what Jamaica was talking about, our relationship to our children and how these systems have shaped that. I recently started listening to Charles Brown. He's a professor, he's a planner in transportation, and the last couple of presentations that he talked about was very specific to what he's calling arrested mobility. And this is really centering on how our youth, and more importantly, like our Black and Indigenous brown youth, are sanctioned at enormous amount of rate in comparison to white youth or white adults. They're stopped more as they walk. They're given infractions and ticketing. They're stopped and harassed and murdered on bikes. On our transit system, we're heavily policed. We're removed from from the transit vehicles. If we do not have fare, we're not let on the system. Shared mobility, the statistics he was providing was we're passed up. Our drivers will pass us up if they see us, or end the ride or charge us exorbitant amounts. This is built into the algorithm based on where you live. And then driving, having more stops, more harassments. And so looking at these particular areas, and I don't really have time to go through all of this, but as a transit planner, as a planner in general, we have to remove our relationship with our policing system. We have to remove the harm that has created and woven into the fabric of the planning practices in general. We have to stop sanctioning our communities and harassing our communities based on code enforcement, so that we're able to thrive. And I say this as a mother and living in a community where I've seen most of the people I grew up with be harassed in our streets and not given, not having the ability to thrive on their own and have the narrative of being their whole self, right? We're constantly having to code switch as we move in and out of our work, and we can't show up as our whole selves. And as a mother, what I'm trying to work on right now is removing these colonizer, settler colonialistic ideologies of how we communicate with our children, and be able to have a child that is raised as a sovereign being, where they can come up with their own ideology and have a free thought into what they want in their own selves. And this relates back to planning, because as a planner, I think we need to really heal our own practices and remove a lot of these policing practices to do that, so that we can show up for our own communities. And so if we remove all of these very structured activities, what does it look like for a planner to really think about a community that they want to plan and live for? We're oftentimes given a set of policies and rules that navigate what we're supposed to be doing, and not really engaging with community, and not engaging with our youth, or even thinking about our youth as the leaders of our policy, or showing up on how we should be communicating this. I ran through this quite quickly. Jump into a really short video that really kind of speaks of raising and protecting our youth, but giving voice to our youth in terms of allowing the freedom, the tenacity, the artistic privilege that they have. We have to start treating our youth as really holy beings, as they're innocent, and they speak their truths, right? And it's a lot of times where it triggers us adults, caretakers, to really quail their innate sense to be vocal about what is happening to them. And so that structure has really transformed how we are as adults, where we don't necessarily engage as our full self. And so if we can raise our children in this manner, and if we can remove these policies, we can protect our children and ourselves to heal. And so this next, I'm gonna add it actually here. And while watching this clip, it's really about how we can learn from our children, and how it can shape our thought as planners to be more encompassing, to be more in tune with our sovereign selves, and to really look at liberation as a whole. Like how do we get there? Can you guys hear it? Yeah.
I can't.
Now.
Yeah.
So much information, so let's kind of look like up the next generation. We can have good new house, clean water. I want to see the changes and share teachings. Be brave and be courageous.
You gotta recognize the pain is neglected. You say you care about a struggle as we wait for connection. Every day is a blessing, so the change will address it. We bring hope to the youth in the face of depression.
Do you see what I see? Do you hear what I hear? Do you dream what I dream? Peace and ocean, inspired to prayers for fire makers. Hear my voice, I'm not afraid to let it out. I made the choice to live my life and stand my ground. I'll trust through the void. The seven teachings make it count. My pride is fun. It's that the fire is found.
Dancing is my medicine. It started in the 5th grade. I came off my comfort zone. Been for a big change, there's so much to do. And it may seem impossible, but with your support,
Lessons taught me. I represent humility. I want to be good. I've been seeing life differently. Treat me equally. Treat me with dignity. This is our time. We can rewrite history. Do you see what I see? Do you hear what I hear? Do you dream what I dream? Peace and ocean, inspired to prayers for fire makers. Do you see the smoke? A signal to the sky. There's fire in my soul. It's how we have survived. This is my home. A change will come in time. Our spirits will grow. We're Anishinaabe for life. Fields of aggression. Let's suspect sacred places. So many changes are needed to feel the safest. I've been keeping the fire while June chasing. Learn and teach the way so we can be the
our
greatest.
leaders haven't shaken hands. We staying busy making plans, changes. I'll pray for them. I'll fight for these native lands and culture. We'll take it back. My people not afraid to dance. Just want to keep the fire burning and make it last.
Do you see what I see?
Okay, so I'm going to end it a little bit short because we are out of time, and that way we can just have maybe some final thoughts from Quentin or JR. But the video was really kind of hit home for me personally, as it's really a group of Native artists that travel throughout and go to different reserves or reservations to work with tribal youth. It really was a discussion on depression. And so when they started working with these youth, they were really kind of getting into being leaders in their own right and talking about healing their community by getting back to their indigenous ways, working with water, animal, and kind of like a higher education, not necessarily in schooling, but their native traditions. And so that's what I wanted to share in that content. But thank you all for coming on, and Quentin, JR.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mar. That was wonderful. I just wanted to read a couple of the comments throughout the presentation that really stuck out to me. So Aileen said that our culture doesn't fully embrace a love of environment, but it seems like such a critical part of raising children. And she made another point and said that if children are not safe outside in public spaces, how will they or can they love the environment? Right. And I think that this really ties in the entire tone and purpose of this presentation, which is about raising and protecting Black, Brown, and Indigenous children. Right. If they have no connection to let me say this, if they have no healthy or affirmed connection to the environment, right, then how can they have an appreciation for it or a love for it, or even feel like it's equally theirs, right? And that it's a part of them and a part of their identity, a part of their spirit, and also a part of their ancestry. And I think that this just really extends to our conversation that we had in the summer as well. What about you, Quentin?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you all so much. I really appreciated the interaction from the participants as well. The chat was
Yes.
popping. And I appreciate always sharing space with you all. The last thing I would like to say is that I want us to make sure as planners that we're connecting these different pieces, like what Amar was talking about.
Yep.
As transportation planners, why couldn't we be fighting for buses that are free, that take people, low-income areas that are, gridlocked inside the city, to some of the wonderful natural aspects that our cities have, to the hiking trails directly. I don't mean like you could get there if you take this bus to that bus to that bus, but where's the service that takes folks directly to the beach? Where's the service that takes folks directly to the nice regional park? So yeah, let's get our kids out into nature and let's go together. Because even when we go out, we're still going to face a little bit of like, hey, what you doing out here? But hey, we free. We got rights to be everywhere that everybody else do. And even if we didn't, we still going to go and we'll figure it out when we get there. So let's get our folks and our kids out into the natural environment and build with each other.
I love that. I love that. Thank you all so much for joining. Do we have time
one last
one
thing
question,
I just wanted to add? Quentin, you shared it earlier, and I put it back on here, is a link to our drive with our presentation and a resource page that we compiled of some pretty amazing books that we have read that are useful in our lives, some podcasts, some social media folks that if you want to check it out, it's pretty awesome. We are out of time, but I'm willing to stay if we can do that, if anybody wants to ask any questions or has anything to ask.
Or even to add to. I know there was a gentleman earlier, Azikiwe. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but Amar, when you were speaking before about Black, Brown, and Indigenous children being policed, he was thanking you for sharing that piece too, because he's a father to a Black son, right? And that just speaks volumes to the police state that we're in, the oppressive police state that we're in, and specifically tied to children. And my having conversations with a few friends and coworkers of mine who do have young children, especially now during COVID-19, where we're all siloed in our respective homes, and media is, again, like I mentioned earlier, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and children have direct access to that through their own mobile devices. Children now at much younger ages than we were perhaps are seeing this very gruesome, heinous content where people who look like them and even young children are being brutalized. And we have to figure out a way to protect children from that, but while also educating them on why this is happening and also having them to be a part of the resistance too. So it doesn't look like we have.
I feel all of that. I did rush through some of the discussion, but some of the work I'm doing right now, Quentin, you talked about having access through transit to our open spaces, and one of the programs that California is leading is the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program that is funding and prioritizing benefits towards disadvantaged communities or low-income communities. And some of the projects right now, it's been quite a big of a push, is to provide free and reduced transit fare to communities. And some communities that have national parks have actually provided routes with free access to the park. One in particular, if you're in California, is YARTS, Yosemite Area Regional Transit, provides almost it's like 61-mile trip into the park. So from Merced down into the park. Mariposa County and Merced County in California, there's about 4 routes that they are providing for free.
Sorry to break you. My name's Dorena. assistant. I know that this conversation has been extremely exciting, but we are trying to keep all the sessions tight. So I'm going to release everyone to go back to the auditorium. We're going to meet G, and Tiffany, and Gloria for the closeout session for today. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
And feel free to reach out to all of the presenters on the Hopin platform. You can DM them, and you can probably meet them in the networking session as well.
Peace. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Q. Bye, Jamaica.
Bye.